And mostly I find people that are incredibly creative and innovative, but thought that's not part of their job description and they're not supposed to do it.
Hello, I'm Doug Powell. Welcome to This is a Prototype, the Design Leadership Podcast. It's summer. Well, at least it's summer in the northern hemisphere of the planet where I'm recording this episode. And what better way to celebrate summer than with a road trip? I caught up with my guest for this episode, Daniela Marzavan, in the middle of an 8-week design road trip she is taking through Europe with her partner and 2 children. She's calling it the Traveling School of Design Thinking. Based in Portugal, Daniela is a self-described pracademic, moving fluidly across the line between design practice and design education. Daniela is fluent in 7 languages and puts many of those languages to use in a practice that takes her across Europe and around the world, working with universities, startups, scaled enterprises, NGOs, and governments, infusing these organizations with design thinking, innovation, and human-centered ways of working. Daniela is the co-author of the new book, Creativity for a Sustainable Future, which seeks to harness the power of creativity as a driving force for positive change in complex environmental, social, and economic problems. We covered a lot of territory in this discussion, and I really enjoyed getting Daniela's refreshing perspective on the trends she is seeing in the global regions she's working in. Trends that don't always match what we see in parts of the design industry dominated by North American tech companies. When I spoke to Daniela, she and her family were in Freiburg, Germany, and we started our conversation with the backstory of this amazing design-driven journey.
So we're on the road for 2 months, visiting different friends, projects, working, traveling, and basically showing our kids the wonders of this world.
And tell me, how old are your kids?
We have 2 girls, Lilith and Merle, and they are 6 and 9. 6 and 8. Yeah.
That's perfect. Those ages are perfect for such an adventure.
They still like us, which is good.
So you're 2 weeks into an 8-week journey. Are they enjoying it? Are you enjoying it? Is it working so far?
Well, the first week is always the toughest because you have to settle into this new tiny space of a camper van. And of course, it's really hard to slow down. So we've had a very, tough year with lots of work, job, school, just a normal life of this sandwich generation when you're like in your 40s and 50s and you have to take care of the younger generation, the older generation, and make money and make your business work. And you're like on a highway of life, just running and doing things. And really slowing down is something that we love to do. It's something that makes us reconnect as a family. And it's painful. Because first of all, you need to be super minimalistic. So we have like 2 bags each and 2 books each. And you have to be very respectful of each other's space because you live on such a small space. And then you never know where you're going to sleep next, where you're going to stop next. We have some scheduled meetings and then really enjoying the ride and not looking at the phone or a laptop. That's hard. And it's scary how society has got us so focused on, performing.
The pace of our life, and we don't even realize it, I think, most of the time because we're in it, but the pace of our life has gotten to be just ridiculous. And, we're just on this train track and we just have to keep going. And that's really lovely that you've recognized this and you've created these times when you can break from that and just reset. I really like that. And it strikes me that you've got some built-in, we talk about design having parameters or designers always having parameters, restrictions, requirements of whatever we're working on. And you have a set of very established requirements in that you're traveling in a very small space, as you say, for an extended period of time.
Exactly. And it really helps to focus. Yeah. So if, everyone gets their 2 bags, 2 books, certain types of food that, it's not perishable because we have a small fridge, but it's also just for a certain time. So you get to see where you are. So you're in Spain. You're like, okay, what do we get here? What kind of food do we buy here? You have these parameters that we've set, and we test it up front. So another thing that designers do, so 2 weeks ahead, we did a weekend where we tested our assumptions that a bus would work the way it works. My partner is a thinker and a maker, he's also a photographer and a handyman. So to him, it's really important that things are aesthetically beautiful and appealing and very functional. So he's built a kind of a kitchen thing that also serves as a working table and as, multifunctional. And he wanted to test it out, how it works. So we spent 2 days at Algarve in Portugal camping, and he was requesting feedback from us. Like, do you like this thing here? How do you feel about this? Is this usage according to your needs? So that was very exciting because I didn't know that.
That's a true prototype, right?
Totally. And then as we travel, we notice, oh, this is something else we need. Oh, this is something that we could have. And it's funny because in the case of building products or things, he sets something in his mind, he makes a sketch, and then he watches for things that he could use. And funny enough, many times on the side of the road, there is a piece of wood that is exactly what he needs. So we just, he stops like, oh, here's the piece of wood I needed for this thing. Like, I'm wishing for it, and then I keep my eyes open, and the world, like Europe at least, it's full of stuff that people don't need and that they put on the side of the road. So he keeps building things. So it's really nice to watch what you have, to work with what you have, to upcycle what you find, but having like really clear criteria up front of what these things should be able to do, right? Yeah. But not be open enough to accept, some flexibility in
to be open to iterate and build on what you learn. That's lovely. I really love that as you are designing your life in a very intentional way in this 8 weeks. So you're in Freiburg, Germany now. Tell me the overall route that you're taking.
So we started in Lisbon. We traveled a bit through the center of Lisbon. Évora, this is a place where a couple of months ago I did a design thinking course aimed at developing the local economy. So this is something very interesting that in Europe is starting to roll out. There's a European program for post-pandemic recovery that helps regions to become more innovative, more creative. And this is something that I've been very interested to see how it works. So we visited them again to see how my work in March has, had impact. And then we continued to Spain. What was interesting, traveling through Spain via Madrid, close to Madrid, was, of course, the desert that parts of Spain has become because of the lack of water. So, we show our kids how the water is so important, how the lack of water is something that comes with the climate change. And then my partner has this really good talent of finding the best wild camping spots. So we found this really nice remote lakes where we could spend some days. And it was funny for our kids to, we go and collect garbage around our car at least. So they were like, how come there are Coke cans here in this most remote place or baby diapers and stuff like that. So the big one goes around with her camera and photographs garbage. And it's like, okay, this is really interesting how this came here. And what would be the journey of this piece of garbage if they could tell what they lived? So they kind of make stories around it. Who used it? How did it come here? Who produced it? Where will they put it back in the trash? So that's something that was very interesting in Spain. And then the nature in Spain is beautiful. So we had encounters. It looks like Grand Canyon. It basically, in smaller, of course, but it's breathtaking and completely empty. We're in the middle of vacation season and no one is there literally. So we had beautiful lake views and bath in lakes that are completely remote. What was also interesting, one lake had a problem with a certain type of mussels that grow in water. So people who were there by boat had to disinfect their boats to make sure that that type of mussel doesn't expand. So we researched about that because the kids were really interested and found out that actually these mussels are very dangerous for the industry, not so much for the ecosystem of the water, but for the industry and the pipes. So again, we had a lot of discussions around, do people really protect the nature, or is it more about protecting the local industry? Having that conversation with your 8-year-old and your 6-year-old that asked, for whom is that a problem? That was interesting. And then in Spain, we also visited a beautiful town called Ainsa at the border to France in the Pyrenees. So really like in the glaciers with beautiful, really freezing cold water. So we could, we could have baths in this cold water. And that's a very interesting route, because it's the route where very many Jews have fled the Nazis in the Second World War. So you have all that history around that route. You had a lot of fighters from the Resistance in that route. So that was a beautiful historic reminder of the power of Europe to really fight whatever demons our continent still has to fight even today. And there is a nice project there. Unfortunately, my friends, what they call Unbeaten Studio. So she is a Costa Rican designer and he is a Dutch designer. And she was my student back at Elisava in Barcelona, maybe 10 years ago. And they created a studio offering life design courses and connecting that with mountain biking. It's called Unbeaten Studio. And that's another trend that I see. So you have a lot of people from big cities like Barcelona buying really old houses in the mountains, in the villages, in the most remote places, and kind of helping the local regional economy grow, creating these projects that revitalize very small local villages that might be dying out. So that was beautiful. That was Spain. And then France, it's another story. So you have the agriculture as one of the biggest industry. So the moment we entered France, we could see like a lot of heavy machinery everywhere, tractors, heavy machinery, workshops for heavy machinery. So you could really see that change of the scale, right? Yeah. And the project we visited, our friend is becoming a farmer now in her 40s. It's a 3-year study she's doing. And she actually told us in France, everyone has an account where money goes into for lifelong learning. So everyone has the opportunity, the chance, and the money to learn something new, in the middle of their career and switch to another area, which I think is brilliant.
That's very human-centered, isn't it?
Isn't it? Yeah. So that's what she does. And then there is subventions. The state gives you 50,000 euro to start off your own agricultural business, to have your goat cheese makery built. And that was really beautiful to see how they used the old crafts to build that building. Everything made of wood, everything built like, old school. And seeing that being celebrated, how it's celebrated in France, was truly heartwarming. Coming from all this conversation on AI and and it's got to teach a world, and we now everything is going to be artificial and amazing, and then you do this slow travel and visit the farmers and visit the people that build a huge construction out of wood, completely stainless, completely, without any Cruise, how do you call it? And the precision you have, it really has to be cut in a certain way to keep that weight. And that love for detail and the material and the respect for the wood and for the material is just so heartwarming and gives me hope. Yeah, that was beautiful.
An appreciation for craft and the connection between the maker and the material. Yeah.
Absolutely. The connection between the maker and the material the patience the maker has with the attributes of the material and that collaboration between the two as equals.
Yeah. How do you then reconcile, or do you perhaps, the world that we're operating in, this world where technology and emerging technology, as you say, is coming at us so fiercely, and then this just sort of beautiful, idyllic, different world that you're stepping into. How are you making sense of that?
Well, right now I'm really just an ethnographic researcher, let's say. So as I explore it, I try not to make sense of it, but just to observe it and to acknowledge it and to be impressed by it. So I try to write down everyday things that I found really interesting. I have good conversation with the kids who basically don't see any big reconciliation necessity there. I mean, there was not a moment for them to say, oh, this is different than what we did in school. Or, they didn't even have that 1 week that for me and my partner was really hard to slow down and go in this new mode. That was a very tough week. We had lots of fights and it was just like, man, like something. And we both knew like, okay, this is the slowing down phase, and it's fine. Let's give ourselves a week, and it was literally a week. But the kids didn't have that. So I think it really helps to have those kids as a mirror, because to them it's absolutely normal to go to a museum where they have this virtual reality experiences and learn about stuff. And then the next week they learn everything about butterflies and small insects and biodiversity, and they don't see any reason to think these two worlds are separate. And in a way, it makes me, I'm reading a book called The Art of Letting Go. It's about ecstatic experiences. And this philosopher really talks about that there are different ways for us to escape the control zone and to have these ecstatic experiences. And one of them is through this artificial world that we create. The other one is through nature. Another one could be through spirituality, religion, art. So in a way, we all kind of try to practice the art of letting go. And I come to the realization that these two ways of letting go control are not that different, actually. But yes, it is interesting to be in the most remote places with those farmers that don't even have a phone. My phone is too old to download WhatsApp on it, and I don't want to buy a new one. Like, really? You're like 30 and you don't have a phone that that can, operate WhatsApp on it? Like, how old is your phone? Right. Yeah, but it's fine.
Almost unthinkable by our urban standards, and yet I imagine they are perfectly content and peaceful and happy in their lives. Yes,
and incredibly busy. I mean, having goats and animals to look after is a 24/7 job. Doesn't stop with snow or rain or heat. Doesn't stop on Sunday or Saturday. So these people are really busy, and despite their busyness, what I've observed is they celebrate the needs of their body to rest and to eat, which is something we don't do in our tech jobs. So I've seen in many companies where I work, people, having their lunch in front of the laptop, just eating something very quick, or having those powders that you can make now. So for breakfast, I eat some powder, some protein powder, because it's quick and then I can be efficient and work. Well, that doesn't happen in France, at least, where you have these 2 hours of eating the best food and nurturing your body and giving the rest that you need to start again. So I think there's something we could all learn more.
Yeah. So France and now into Germany, and you're in Freiburg, which is in the south of Germany, right?
From here, we're heading to friends of my partner who are downhill mountain bikers. So they had some trail exploration here. It's a beautiful place to go for mountain biking and downhill riding. So beautiful trails. It's one of the only places in Germany where mountain bikers actually are allowed to go into the forest and build the trails. The police doesn't chase you. They've done a great job. I know in the US or in Canada, it's a different story, but Europe is kind of, more regulated in that sense. So it's the paradise for mountain bikers. So that's next stop. So we have a lot of tinkering and repairing and doing stuff with the bikes. And then we're going to stop in Frankfurt. And that's two friends who are building bags, beautiful bags. It's called Industrierelikt. And they're using the leftovers from yacht materials, like from the leather from yachts and from luxury cars. And they started to take those leftover materials from luxury yachts and luxury cars and making bags out of it. And they also use the wooden part for the floor of the bag. So I have one of those first bags, prototypes, because they were my neighbors when I was doing my PhD at the Bauhaus University in Weimar. They were product designers, and I was doing my PhD on design thinking and management, and they were my next door neighbors in our university co-working space, kind of. That was like an entrepreneurial co-working space where we had different people in this beautiful villa in Weimar at the Bauhaus University. So we became friends. We became very curious about each other's work. And we're going to visit their new workshop in Frankfurt. And I encourage everyone who's listening to get one of those bags. They last for a lifetime. Obviously, the material is really good. The design is beautiful. It's made completely out of
repurposed material and waste material. I'll put a link to that in the podcast site and make sure that people can easily get to that. That sounds amazing. So Frankfurt, and then continuing to Germany.
Then I'll go to the Bauhaus University. Okay. So next to, close to Weimar, there is a university for management. So I'm going to give a weekend course for small and medium enterprises around Germany that want to learn entrepreneurial thinking. So they will learn design thinking the first 2 days with me, and the third day with my colleague. It's about entrepreneurial thinking and how can you bring entrepreneurial thinking into small, medium enterprises. It's more like entrepreneurship. Some of them might want to take a leap of faith and become entrepreneurs, but most of them really just want to make their own organizations more innovative or move more to a more strategic level. And I've been asked to give this introduction to designerly ways of thinking and doing stuff. And I'm very excited about it.
Well, that's very interesting, talking about small to medium-sized enterprises. And we've both worked with larger scaled businesses and organizations. And we can convince ourselves that all businesses now know this stuff, know how to innovate and know how to be entrepreneurial and know how to think like designers. And I'm curious, as you're now interacting with small and mid-sized enterprises and interacting with municipal organizations, cities and regional governments, what are you finding as far as the appetite for this human-centered, design-driven way of thinking and addressing problems? What's the appetite for that?
That's a great question. I find, I might be biased, but I think in times of crisis, the appetite raises. Maybe it's not the appetite. It's really desperation. It's really, all the things that when you worked before don't work now. The type of people I find in small, medium-sized enterprises and in, municipal, local governments, they're mostly very traditional, never change a running system. If things work out, why should we change? We've always done things like this around here. You mostly, have maybe family enterprises that have been led in a certain way since 150 years. So people don't even have that muscle of changing all the time to stay on top of your game because you're not going to be competitive, because you don't need that. Like, there is not so much competition. I think the human brain likes to be lazy and to do repetitive things. So why bother when you can just leave at 4 p.m., and do your thing and then start living your life? Well, in the last years, especially in Europe, I mean, all over the world, things have changed dramatically with our democracy being questioned by different powers, extreme right or extreme left even. We have wars at the, at our border, at our European Union border, which are much closer than the other wars that have been around. But in Europe, you don't really notice them if you don't work in that environment. Then we have, of course, the recession and the global, inflation. So especially in Germany, but also in other European countries, this laziness of innovating doesn't work anymore. So there is an appetite, there is a curiosity there to test out things that might have been discarded as crazy creative before. I don't think it's a genuine interest. I think it's more desperation and it's fear. I don't like when things come from a place of fear. I think that's wrong. I accept that they come from a place of fear. And what I try to do is to tap into the curiosity and creativity of the individuals that join me in these type of workshops or classes or courses. And mostly I find people that are incredibly creative and innovative, but thought that's not part of their job description and they're not supposed to do it. And they would never really even think about applying those skills that they mostly apply in their private life. They might have a workshop. They might have they might volunteer in a NGO. So I find out beautiful things about these people and how they're incredibly innovative and creative on a personal level, but thought or had the conviction that this is nothing they should ever apply in their job, either because they don't have the permission or they don't have the job description, whatever. And that's changing now. And organizations and especially leaders have to learn this new language, the language of giving permission to play, giving permission to try. They have to learn new ways to lead and to empower, to have this more empowering leadership rather than the administrative leadership style where you basically, manage some predictive numbers. And I think it's much more on a leadership level that I see the need to change the mentality. For middle managers or even, people who do the groundwork, I see a lot of creativity and innovation and just this, they're puzzled at the beginning. Like, really? Like, are we really supposed to show up as our full selves now? Oh, that's cool. Like, isn't that dangerous? Like, should we? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's not normal for them. And that's not how they've been. All of the systems for incentives and accountability and what they're rewarded for in their work and what they're punished for in their work, if they don't perform, are all based on a completely different set of criteria. And here you are saying, no, now you have now you have permission to bring a different part of yourself to work and to be creative and to be innovative. And that must take some resetting. I know I've worked with many of those audiences in different organizations, and I know how challenging that is when they look at you like, what are you saying?
Right. Well, and I have to say, so these are the small, medium enterprises, right, that we talk about in small companies. But I have also observed tech startups in the heart of Lisbon, those tech startups that build, the newest flying taxi or, the AI powered street light that helps you generate data for the police safety, whatever amazing tech driven products or services there. And there I found a huge lack of design-driven innovation, permission. There is a total misunderstanding from the founders' side that they think they are really good people in culture managers, which they're mostly not, because they're just like PhD in physics or in mathematics, which is amazing. And they might be former NASA or former whatever, you name it, McKinsey, former this, former that, former this. So this is like what counts for them to get investors' money. And I've been invited a couple of times to these accelerators to talk about how important it is to manage people and culture and to keep your people innovative and creative, and so they can really show up as their full selves in an organization that is very uncertain, right? Because you can't be that administrative manager in an organization like a startup that is absolutely uncertain. So you don't know if it's going to exist in 6 months from now. It does work in a small, medium enterprise that has been around since 130 years, and everything is 100% predictable and reliable because you have the same clients, the same, partners, and you're doing just something that is absolutely predictable for the next 5 years. Right. Yes, okay, I understand that you have a certain management style and your people are not supposed to be creative or innovative, they're just supposed to do business as usual and by the numbers. But then if you have a tech startup that is absolutely volatile and you apply the same management style as a small, medium enterprise that produces machinery for agriculture, that doesn't work. And that's one of the most dangerous misunderstandings that I find in my work, because I've encountered tech startups that have started to flirt with human-centered design principles and have backed off right away. Because first of all, the people were super happy about it. Some of them were disappointed, left the company because it wasn't really authentic. And then the leaders don't really have those skills to manage in a way that you let go, right? Because as a startup founder, you just it's your baby, it's my baby, I know the best. Yeah. So I think for designers, we have very different roles in different types of organizations.
Oh, well, that's actually very interesting that you're picking up on this pattern in the startup community in these accelerators that you're engaging with, where my assumption would be that the startups are born from innovation and they have the muscle for innovation. And that's where we see the innovation happening at the highest level. And what you're saying is, no, not at all. And perhaps we're at an era now, this startup culture that we are observing has now been around for a generation or more. And maybe now we're seeing it sort of becoming more established and more settled and more, I don't know, to use a word that you used earlier, more lazy, perhaps?
Yes. I know, right? That was my assumption. Doug, that was exactly my assumption. So for 10 years, I haven't even looked into startups. I was like, these are not interesting for me as a client. That's not interesting because they intrinsically, startups work user-centric. They test and prototype and iterate early on. I mean, that's how startups roll. Right. That's how my first startup rolled. That's how I even got my first rendezvous with design thinking was in my very first startup. So I had the same assumption. And this year I had a chance to actually work very closely with the startup and to speak to startups. And it's incredible how much work we have to do there.
Oh, that's a real insight and something that I think we need to track as we go forward. That challenges a lot of assumptions, I think.
And I also found that investors start to look into or start to ask startups. Think early enough before their second round, before they scale up, to look into their people and culture and their designerly ways of managing. Because if you have an organization built on design thinking or designerly principles from the very beginning, it's easier to scale. And you have that built-in mentality that your role is going to change every 4 weeks, and that's fine. So you can co-create or co-craft your job description with your leaders as the organization grows. And I think there is a lot of value in having design at the very DNA of a startup. And we have, of course, Airbnb as one of the most popular examples.
Tell me, you call yourself a pracademic. I really appreciate that title that you've given yourself. Tell me about your practice. We've gotten some hints of it here as you've been telling us about your journey. But describe your practice. You're working in academic settings, but also obviously with commercial and business and NGOs. And
well, as a reflexive practitioner, I've always reflected on my practice to try to understand why things happen in a certain way. And this curiosity led me to enrolling in a self-made PhD course. I was actually an independent PhD student at Bauhaus University. So I designed my own PhD in order to have this frame that helps me reflect my own practice and understand why things work, why they don't. Always checking for patterns. And I had this huge privilege to get the scholarship, to be accepted, to do this very unique, let's say, independent research at the Bauhaus University. I thought that's very interesting. One of my first choices would have been Stanford, obviously, the D school. Then I digged even deeper and I found out it's this way of thinking and doing that we now call design thinking actually stems from the Bauhaus way of thinking. And it has something very radically political in it, which is the thought that you will put economists, engineers, artists, architects together at one table to build a city is something that Hitler didn't like at all. And the Nazi regime didn't like at all. That's why they closed down the Bauhaus school in Weimar. It lasted for 1 year. So I really wanted to go back to that place to see how dangerous it is for a very closed society to have that type of holistic thinking, to have that radical interdisciplinarity, that radical creativity and transparency that you need when you put different disciplines together and you design from a user perspective, where form follows function, where you try to walk in the shoes of your user and of the other stakeholders at your table. So that was something that really intrigued me. And back then I was teaching design thinking as an elective course at a university in Germany, in Berlin, where I was invited to teach by a professor that had kind of researched about my work with the first startup I was involved in, which is a co-working space. We built up a co-working space together with an amazing founders teams from scratch in a time where co-working wasn't really a business model in Europe at all. So we kind of co-created the business model, the pricing, the products, everything, even the food that was sold in the cafeteria, we co-created it with our first users. And that I didn't know anything about the term design thinking, human-centered design. I'm a political scientist in my first education, political scientist, psychology, organizational psychology, and gender studies. These were my, let's say, that's how I looked at the world. But at the same time, I was also a performing artist. So I had my own theater company. We were traveling around Europe with our play. And of course, I knew how a creative group works together. If you're a small theater company and travel around the world, you know how interdisciplinarity has to be well coordinated. Everyone needs their freedom, but you need to collaborate very closely, and you create an experience for the audience, right? So this was my language of co-creation. And I know in the first startup where I was involved, we had one designer and she was a complete outcast because nobody really understood what she meant. And at the time, I didn't get along well with her, but she was basically my very first real encounter with radical user-centric design. And I'm very thankful for that until today. But she did not know how to express the power of her discipline. And that's something I still see. I see very many designers until today that don't have a clue about how important it is to communicate the strength of this discipline, and how this discipline is the glue between all the other disciplines. And we need to tap into the shoes of the engineer, of the business person, of the finance guy, of the salesperson, not only in the shoes of our client, right? And really translate and mediate between all these different stakeholders. So that was something I was really good at. So I could always tap into what she wanted to say and translate it to the other founders. Fast forward, I left the company at a certain point, and then this professor invited me to teach design thinking with her, saying, the way you guys built that first startup it's called design thinking. It comes from Stanford, from the D school. And I'm teaching it, but I don't have examples for it because that was like 2011 or 2010. So it was very early. So like, oh, really? Well, I'm happy to join. I don't know. I'll see if I can help you. And teaching those classes with her really made me understand that what we were doing was a practice called design thinking, US-centric design. I started reading the books, Tim Brown, and Change by Design was the very first one. And then I got very curious about reading more about it because finally I had a name to what we were doing intrinsically. And I had
a vocabulary
to describe something that seemed so natural to us. And that was interesting. So I got very curious in this academic understanding of what it is. And as I was going deeper into that, I thought, I could enroll in a PhD to have this setting and access to the books and the libraries and the conferences and the funding and everything. That was more opportunistic. I was just really curiosity driven. I never wanted to pursue any career in academia. And doing that, I found a lot of management theories that showed me, we need to fundamentally rethink the way we manage organizations. I tapped into, philosophical stances about how we organize our society and how our society could be more citizen-centric, how bureaucracy, helps us in certain ways, and the other ways you have to co-create with citizens to create services that serve them, and so on and so forth. So I found myself being in academia, but not being driven by the desire to become, a tenure track professor or whatever my colleagues wanted. I was generally curious to understand stuff from practice. And I came up with the term pracademic because I thought, okay, I'm a practitioner and an academic. I'm a pracademic. Maybe I'm a universal charlatan that knows everything, nothing too deep, as we know designers sometimes are. I'm not really a designer because, besides my PhD in design, I don't really have the craft. But I'm an expert in the design process. So that's something I'm really good at. Creating that process and facilitating between different stakeholders and translating between the languages of each discipline. And that's where my polyglot past comes into game because I speak 7 languages. So my brain is kind of trained to translate things from one reality to another. My practice right now, it's really that. And I always jump to academia to see what is the newest research. Sometimes I write research papers with practitioners, or I co-author a book. I go to academic conferences just to check in with the newest academic research. And what I love about academia is that it's non-commercial. So people really help each other. I do peer reviews for journals. So it's another way of thinking. You are in a pursuit of the truth and not in the pursuit of profit.
Yeah.
And it's a very different way of thinking, and I appreciate being in that world.
So much to dig into there. I mean, you are fluent in 7 languages, as you say, which is extraordinary. And so you are attuned to everyone at that multidisciplinary table. You said something earlier in that passage about being the glue. Well, you use the word glue. I think that's the best word for it. But connecting all of those disciplines and all of those points of view that these players bring to the table, and that glue that we are so often gets dismissed or not recognized as something that is valuable and important in these settings. So I really appreciate that you highlighted that as a contribution that we bring.
And I think it's a contribution that is so deeply humane that it will take a while to have any type of artificial system intelligence doing that job. So it does become a competitive advantage to have that ability and that skill. And I still think designers are bad at articulating that power.
The power and the value of that. I love that you framed that as a differentiator, as a competitive advantage in an era when we see so many designers convincing ourselves that we are under pressure, that we are not relevant, that we're not going to be able to thrive in an era of AI, for instance. You know, this podcast speaks to leaders of design teams and leaders of who are often working in very complex organizations. And I'm wondering if you have any guidance, any advice for the design leaders out there who are embedded in these very challenging environments. Any guidance, any advice that you would give?
Well, I think the type of audience that your podcast has is the audience I'm going to meet at the end of our travels in Berlin and in Helsinki, where I'm going to teach design leaders two classes, master classes on how to tackle the SDGs and Agenda 2030 through design as a tool for multi-stakeholder engagement, and also how to bring your organization or corporation towards being more innovative. And I'm not really sure. My advice until now has always been, be more bold and don't compromise. Be loud and present about your tools, your power. But I've seen many losing their job over that advice, including myself. So, it's dangerous to give that advice. Nevertheless, I think that's the only advice I can truly, authentically give. Don't compromise on your values. Don't do that. Don't compromise on your inner conviction and what you know is the power of design and what you can bring to the world. And it's hard at times. I mean, I try to change so many difficult systems from within, and I failed greatly at it. But it's nothing more pricey than losing that inner freedom that you have. And I think designers value, or people who think in a designerly way or manage organizations in designerly ways, what they truly value the most is the freedom they have. And they don't only value it, they're dependent on it, because you need to have freedom as your highest value in order to be creative, in order to be innovative, in order to think of things that are unthinkable. So we breathe and live from freedom. So don't give up that freedom.
That's all for this episode of This is a Prototype, the Design Leadership Podcast. Special thanks to Scott Leach of Brand Speak Communications for his production assistance, and to Graham Barton for his original theme music. I'd love for you to help me grow the audience for this podcast by liking and following it on your favorite podcast platform. And I'd also love your help finding great design leaders for future episodes of the show. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn with your ideas. You can find out more about my work as a design leader on my website, dougpowell.design. That's all for now. We'll see you next time.